So last week we talked about free to be me, about really being free fully inside and out. And this week what I'd like to talk about is those invisible cloaks that we hide behind. Our nature is wholeness, completeness, and perfection. And yet we hide behind these invisible cloaks, those things that we don't want other people to know about us, those things that we really don't even like looking at sometimes about ourselves. So the question this week is this: what is the one choice I can make today to coax the invisible to become visible? What is the one choice I can make today to coax the invisible to become visible? So what are you hiding in your life? We are emphasizing this week, noticing, being right where we are, and yet taking that challenge to look at our mental models and see what are we really believing about ourselves or about other people. So if you don't understand what a mental model is, this is a slight definition of it. It's like a lens that we look through. It's the way we see things. And mental models color the way we believe. And they're actually bigger than our beliefs because they give us a context in which we live. And sometimes we're so familiar with our mental models that we aren't even aware that we're using them because they're so habitual. And that's what makes them so powerful, because they've become habits in our life. So a few examples of mental models might be, when I was growing up, I thought that every family in my neighborhood and every family of the kids in my school, that they went home to a very loving and kind household. I was quite old by the time I realized that that wasn't the way everybody's life was. I didn't understand that one of the reasons that people really loved coming to our house was because it was just filled with love all the time. There really wasn't anything else going on there. Another mental model is teachers often believe that it's okay that they're underpaid because they're shaping kids' minds. And so they believe that because they have this altruistic view of they're getting to shape the minds of kids, their mental model is it's okay that their salary doesn't match the job of them actually shaping our children's minds. So everything we experience in our lives comes from our own mental models of the world. We've grown up creating these models day in, day out. And so sometimes we need to change them, and that's really tricky. So ask yourself, have you taken a vow of poverty, a vow of victimhood, a vow of less than, or some other vow by which you live? Where is your invisible cloak? And do you want to ditch it? So how to ditch it is actually the topic that we're talking about today. You know, we often hide parts of ourselves because our mental model tells us if other people knew that, then they would whatever. Like if other people knew that I yelled at my kids when they were growing up, they might have a less version of who I am as a person. They might believe that I'm not a very good minister. We all have things that we do in our lives that we would prefer that not only that we hadn't done, but that other people don't know about them. My mental model of the world was such that when I was at a community in Portland, it took me years to tell people that I was actually a geek, because my mental model of geeks was that they weren't good communicators and that they kind of stayed to themselves. And I didn't fit that model because I felt like I was a pretty good communicator, and also I didn't like being by myself all the time. So I hid the truth for quite a while, because that truth in my mental model was that other people would treat me differently as soon as they knew. And I think a lot of us do that. It's like the elephant in the room. We want it to go away, but we're not acknowledging that it's in the room. So what is the elephant in your mental models? And here's the thing. Mental models and trying to change them or get rid of those invisible cloaks that we have, it's not about eliminating them, and it's not about fixing them. It's about taking another look at them and examining whether or not they're really the truth, or whether they're keeping us from living fully truthful. And that's a big distinction. We're not talking about trying to fix ourselves or go back and look at every mental model, but it is a good idea to actually look at how are you living your life, and are there places in it where you feel like you don't have much influence? Because the truth is, you have influence over every area of your lives. So when you're in a sailboat, they have this trim tab, and the trim tab allows the boat to move through the water more efficiently. And there's also a rudder, and if you change the rudder, you can direct the boat in a different direction. And so looking at our mental models is about making those tiny little changes that might help us live our lives more fully and certainly live them more openly. I know that in Harry Potter, there was a lot of times that he would put a cloak over himself and you couldn't see him. He could move about unseen. Those are the things that we want to examine. Where do we put a cloak over some part of us because we don't want other people to see it? So Ernest Holmes in The Invisible Power says there is a difference whether you believe in actual limitation or merely in a restricted form of freedom. If limitation were a thing in itself, you could not change it. But since it's merely an outline of experience, why not use your imagination to exchange that experience? And this is the heart of our mental model discussion here. You are infused with this imagination within you. It's part of one of your God qualities. And we can use that imagination to change our experience, to actually look at our limitations in a different way. I actually was amazed at how people reacted to me being a geek. They said, wow, you really have right brain and left brain usage. So it was so different than what my model would have been. It was like, I guess I should have told people sooner. So what we're going to do now is take a look at how we actually can celebrate our failures. Do you know that Edison actually celebrated failure? He knew that failure was just one more thing he had learned that wouldn't work. And we can't replace all of our mental models, and we're not always aware of which of them are working or not. But when we start to work on replacing a mental model, we have to be careful that we actually replace it, because we tend to want to go back to what's familiar and the way we've been living for years and years, maybe with the mental models from when we were children. So I invite you to make a list of all the things that aren't working in your life. And some of those things might be hard to admit. But once you've made the list, you can look at what mental models you have that are associated with each item on that list and see what is your thought around that. Now, my thoughts wouldn't necessarily be the same as your thoughts around it, but when you look at it and you ask yourself what's my thought around that, you're starting to develop what is your mental model around that. I might not react in the same way that you would, but where we look at things and where we inform ourselves about things by our mental models is where our thoughts take us. So if we're living in a world where we feel like a victim, maybe it's time we start looking at, why am I acting as a victim? I have an inseparable power within me. Why am I playing the victim? Or if you're looking at lack of self-esteem, ask yourself, what is it that I don't like about myself? Or what is it that I'm telling myself about myself that's not true? We all have to know what the science of mind tells us, that when we stand in the light, we cast a shadow across the pathway of our own experience. So what we want to do is step out of the light of the divine and notice, let it shine on that shadow of our own experience. We have to instill within ourselves that fundamental proposition that's part of our philosophy, that good is without bounds. And in Psalm 23, It tells us, only good and loving kindness shall follow me the days of my life. So we all have mental models that aren't serving us. Those invisible cloaks that we wear that hide parts of ourselves. And we pretend to love that part of ourselves, but we don't really. It may be difficult for you to define all your areas where you have invisible cloaks. So one of the things that you might do is ask somebody you trust to tell you the truth. What do they observe about you and those places within you that maybe you hide? They might not have the answer, but if they know you well enough, they probably can give you some hints. Where in your life do you have an opportunity to release the mental models that aren't working with you? And one of the ways that we release them is we make friends with them, and we notice what it is that they had good for us in our lives, because we wouldn't stick with it if it wasn't at least serving us in some small way. So in order to remove those invisible cloaks, we have to see where the good was in the mental model that we were using, and then hang on to that part and get rid of the part that's not serving us. So your challenge this week is this. Go into your heart and ask your spirit to pick a cloak for you to throw away. Your heart will tell you one that is going to be reasonable for you to start with. Be careful, because remember, if we throw that mental model away, we're going to go pick it back up if we don't replace it with something else. So look at what you need to do in order to replace it with a functional mental model, and then make that a daily practice. Be aware of using that mental model throughout the next week or the next month, because it's really going to serve you. There's a quote that I want to read, and it's a long quote, so I'm going to just pick up my paper here and read it. We say that the mountains show forth the glory of God, but it isn't that way. The mountains are the glory of God, in the same sense that Einstein's second equation tells us that energy and mass are equal, identical, and interchangeable. This equation is fundamental to our philosophy. For Einstein isn't saying that energy energizes mass. That's exactly what he isn't saying. He's not saying that it flows through and influences and controls mass. He says energy is mass. Mind and matter are the same thing. Get your thoughts to be congruent with your heart and what you know is that mental model that's going to serve you, and you'll be able to keep it.